Okay, so where can we get the value of the name? So since the name is in this class, so we can use the instance variable directly, or I want you to make to get used to calling a method, okay, an accessor method to give you to return the value of the name. So in this case, the accessor method that returns the name is the get name. So I want you to get used to doing this, meaning the calling of accessor methods instead of using the instance variables, because it's not always in the same class that you are accessing the instance variable in, right? Sometimes you are in a different method, in a different class, and you cannot access the instance variables because they are private. So I want you to get used to calling the accessor methods instead. So that's what I'm doing right now. So toString calls the get name instead of accessing the instance variables, even though they are, the instance variable name is in the same class. But I want you to make it as a habit, make it a habit of calling the accessor instead of accessing the instance variable. And then what else this method returns is the age. So I want to display the age on this in the next row. And where can we get the name, the age? So instead of accessing the instance variables, which is okay because the age is in the same class, but I want you to make it a habit, calling the accessor instead. And then the last thing this method returns as part of the object representation is the ID. So I want ID to be on the next line. That's why I put this /n right here. Again, let's use let's call the get ID instead. So I want toString to call get ID method instead of accessing the instance variable ID. Okay, so the person class is done. So the next thing to do is the student class. So student extends person, and the person has two additional major instance variables like major and credit hours. Okay, so since student is a person, so my question is, does student have to have string name? Does the student class have the same instance variables like what person have here? Well, like what person has here, name, age. Okay, so let me just copy paste. So this is my question for you. So since student is a person and student also has name, age, and ID with the additional major and credit hour, so is what I'm doing correct? So what is the other? Major is string, like computer science or computer engineering or business management. And the last instance variable of student class is credit hour. Credit hour is, let me declare it as double. Okay, so it's possible to have, one major is 2.5 hours. Okay, 2.5 hours long, or 3 hours long, or 3.5 hours long, something like that. So I would declare it as double instead. Okay, so the name of the instance variable is credit hour. Okay, let me just write it there. Okay, so it makes sense that this class has name, age, and ID simply because student has all those. Every student has a name, every student has age, every student has ID. But since a person has already has name, ID, and age. So it doesn't make sense if student also has all those, right? It doesn't make sense. The reason why students inherits from person is to have whatever the person has, so student can have all those. So it doesn't make sense if student still has all these, okay, because student extends person. So in other words, whatever person class has, student class has. If person has name, ID, and age, so technically student has name, ID, and age. So as programmers, we don't have to explicitly declare the name, the age, and the ID one more time in the subclass, because like what we wrote here in the class declaration, student extends person. So if person has all these instance variables, logically student has all those as well, even though we don't write them explicitly like this. Even though we do not write them explicitly, technically or logically student has these three as well, because of this keyword extends right here. So Java understands that students inherits person. So whatever person has, like name, age, and ID, technically or logically student has them all. Okay, also all these methods are also inherited by students. So technically speaking, all these methods are inherited by students. So student class has all these methods as well. So technically all of these, technically, logically, all of these, okay, student class has all of these because of one keyword, because of these. Okay, so student extends person, meaning to say student class has all of these as well, inherits all these from person class. So I don't have to, as a programmer, I don't have to declare name, ID, and age here explicitly, because technically, logically, student has name, age, and ID because it inherits from person, and person has all of these already. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so again, we have two instance variables right here. So student also has two set methods or mutator methods, and also two get methods or accessor methods, plus the toString. And of course, before we forget, this class also has the constructor to initialize the instance variables. Okay, so the name of the constructor is the same as the name of the class, which is student. Okay, and again, what did I tell you about constructor? Constructor is used to initialize the instance variables. So how many local variables, how many parameters should we write in the constructor declaration area? Is it only two, like string M for major and double for credit hours? No, remember, student also has name, age, and ID logically because it extends person. So it must have 5 local variables, right? Mr. AP, how come there are 5 parameters? How come there are 5 local variables? There are only 2 instance variables, right? Yes, explicitly we just declared two instance variables, but remember, student extends person. Remember, student inherits from person. So in other words, whatever person class has, student class has as well. So if person has name, age, ID, student also has those three. So it must accept also the name, the age, and the ID, plus the explicitly declared instance variables right here. So it becomes 5. So in other words, student constructor initializes 5 instance variables. Though the 3 are from the superclass, the name, the age, and the ID, and the other 2 is its own instance variables, the major and the credit hours. So that's the responsibility of the subclass. It has the responsibility of initializing the instance variables of its superclass. Okay, it's not just always accepting or receiving. Okay, student class, yes, it receives, it gets from the superclass, it receives from person class, but it's not always receiving. Student is also, student class has also gives. And what does it do as, to give to the superclass? It initializes these instance variables from the superclass. So that's the responsibility of the subclass. Yes, it receives, it inherits, right? It gets something from the superclass, but it's not always getting something. It also does something for the superclass, and that's the initialization of the superclass's instance variables. So it initializes the instance variables of the superclass. That's why it needs 5 values to initialize these 2 plus the 3 from the super. Okay, so how can the student constructor initializes the 3 instance variables? And it's also already done in this. So since it's already done in the superclass's constructor, so the subclass constructor has to call the superclass's constructor by using the keyword super. Okay, and this means that the student's constructor calls the superclass's constructor, which is this one. And since the superclass's constructor, the person class constructor, accepts 3, so the caller, which is the student constructor, has to pass the 3 values. And what are those 3 values that person constructor accepts? The name, the age, and the ID. So super calling with 3 arguments, which is the name, the N here, the A, and last but not least, the I. Okay, so again, one more time. So the constructor of the subclass, the constructor of the student class, has 5 parameters. It has 5 local variables. Because why? Why is it 5? There are only 2 instance variables in student class. Yes, I agree with you. But remember, student extends person. So in other words, student is a subclass of person. So in other words, student also has these instance variables. Student also has to initialize the 3 instance variables here in person, right? That's why it needs 5 to do the initialization thingy. The first 3 are the ones from the superclass. Remember, the constructor of the superclass accepts 3 local variables, the n, the a, and the i's, to initialize the three. And the last two is to initialize, are used to initialize